Good evening, and welcome all to Karren's Carrots. So glad that you're here this evening. I want to thank you for joining. This is Karren Carrots. I also am the CEO and founder of EAs in the C-Suite. EAs in the C-Suite is something I'm really passionate about. And of course, I like to call special sauce is emotional intelligence or soft skills, that which we need to be better leaders, to up level our performance, to be great team players, and also to show the most important humility to others. Tonight we have a special guest. I am really interested in this guest because the time is so pertinent to hear this. I want you all to give a big welcome to Ms. Lisa Kadle. Lisa
Hello,
Kadle is
everyone.
a certified grief counselor, and she's here to share with us. I mean, she has a really storied background. I'll let her share that with you, go into a deeper dive. And actually, it's my first time meeting a grief counselor, which I've had personal experience with on another level, but my first time actually meeting a certified grief counselor. And Lisa, welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome. Lisa's title tonight is Death, Dying, and Loss in the Time of Chaos. Welcome, Lisa.
Thank you so much for having me, Karen. It is always a pleasure to just be able to talk about grief. And I really thank you for that opportunity.
Oh, you're quite welcome. You're quite welcome. I've had several inquiries when folks knew you were coming on. So let's just go at it. Why don't you start with giving us a little background about you and how you arrived at this important juncture in your journey?
Sure. My journey started in 2014 after a series of losses, my losing my father to homicide in 92, losing my mother in 2008 to lung cancer. And in between those losses, I actually had three miscarriages. One was I was 4.5 months pregnant and lost my son. And so something that I was involved in at our church actually was a comfort ministry where we had grief and and support for those who were grieving. But I got away from that because I was doing other obligations as well. I'm an evangelist, so other things pulled me away in another direction. But in 2014, I just was overwhelmed with the stories that I was hearing about people who were suffering loss. And it was loss of relatives, but also loss of jobs, loss of opportunities. And I needed to find something that would help me help them through their journey of grief. So I joined a course called Coaching at End of Life, where we walk the journey with those who are grieving and also those who are at their end of life themselves. So those who are in hospice care or facing a terminal illness. So just my heart became very overwhelmed through prayer. Lord, how can I help people through the journey that I've gone through? And so that they can understand that death is a part of life, but there is also hope in that journey.
Now, you mentioned a particular area that I actually had some involvement in, but just hearing you speak about it, it's actually was with a best girlfriend who
Mm.
had breast cancer, and she had it for years, and her method of treatment for herself, if you will, was holistic, not the non-traditional way. But
Mhm.
just spoke about was end of life, like that period where death is imminent. I mean,
Yes.
might be 6 months, it might be 3 months, whatever. But boy, I hate to put it this way, but it's like you have a death sentence and it's known. So talk about that period through there because sometimes folks are in denial. My involvement really was taking care of all of her business and legal things.
Mm-hmm.
Her family, they basically sat by but welcomed that I was doing all these things because they didn't know which way to turn.
Absolutely. I think one of the things that we honestly don't think about is end of life for ourselves. You know, where we view it from a scope that I'm healthy, everything is fine. I really don't need to put anything in order because I can take care of it. When you are in hospice care, the very first thing that you need is just the emotional support, you know, because you're dealing with so many areas of grief on so many levels. You're grieving the loss of your health. You spoke of denial, and denial is huge in grief and those who are in hospice because no one wants to believe the reality that I'm going to one day leave my family. And so, the best thing that we can do as friends, family members, caregivers is give them that a safe space where they can experience the grief, they can talk about that grief, but also asking, how can I assist? You know, and just like you shared, many times we don't know, no one knows how they need that assistance until that they're at that point. So you stepping in, taking over the business of your friend was extremely helpful, you know, and it helped also to put the family at ease, I would believe, because there are so many things going through your head. There are so many moving parts when you are in hospice that sometimes you just have to put the brakes on and say, wait, I need to deal with this. And some things are just going to have to wait. One of the things with that I'm really trying to do is assist people before we get to that point that we need that type of assistance is putting things in order now where it's not a second thought and it's also not a burden to your family. So for instance, if someone were to come to your home, would they know where to find your insurance policies? Where they know the contact information of your doctor, where they know who to contact first, you know, on your emergency list. We have a lot of people who don't have children. You know, some people say, well, I'll leave it to my children to take care of. And there are a lot of people who don't have children. So, do you have a trusted friend who could step in and take care of your affairs? If you are on hospice, it's also good to have a living will, where you know you are giving the medical directives as well as your personal directives. What would you have them do in the hospital? Do you want to be resuscitated? You know, what will happen if you are unable to make decisions? Who's going to make those decisions for you? So in hospice, though, the first thing in hearing the news that you have a terminal illness is to have an emotional support system for yourself because they go through so many levels of grief, you know, and they start to think about life completely differently than we do because they do know that the time is short. And they do know they only have a limited time. So having that time to spend with family, I believe too, a big part of grief is also the forgiveness factor, you know, not holding on to things at the end of life, forgiving people, forgiving yourself, you know, not blaming yourself for what's happening to you, because that also tends to speed up that illness, you know, and things like that.
Let me ask this question, and I don't even know what the answer is. When is a good time to prepare this? This what? To prepare a conversation, to prepare documents that you share with someone, to prepare if anything happens to me Here is insurance. Here are numbers to call. This is what I would like to happen. Not only when do you have that conversation, if this question is appropriate, how do you prepare someone to have the conversation?
Well, the time to prepare is now. The conversation, as uncomfortable as it is, it's a very uncomfortable conversation. It's just to have it. There is no right or wrong way to bring up that topic, especially if it needs to be done. I'll give you a case in point. When my mother was diagnosed with lung cancer, she was diagnosed in June of 2007. And in July of 2007, we lost our mother in June. I'm sorry, it was June of 2007. We lost her in July of 2008. And we knew some things to do, but not everything. It wasn't until the doctor gave his final diagnosis that she pulled in my brother and my sister and I, and she said, I need to tell you what I want. And we were still praying and hoping, Mom, you're going to beat this. Regardless of what this doctor said, you're still able to heal from this. But as uncomfortable as that conversation was, she knew she needed to have that. Even with her grown children, she still needed to let us know what were her wishes so that we could carry them out. And so I would strike it up, and I would first have a very trusted and responsible person who is going to follow through on everything that has been asked and requested. And if they're unable to do so, find maybe 2 or 3 people to divide those things with. So it's not all lying on one person. But I definitely wouldn't wait. And this is also a conversation to have with children who are old enough to understand that death is real and that it's going to happen. And so one of the things, we have a daughter who's a teenager, and my husband and I, through just conversation, we're preparing her and letting her know that it's not always the case that we're going to grow old and die. Anything could happen, and we need you to at least know where the folder is so that you can hand that off to an aunt or uncle or grandparent. At least give her something. Even if she doesn't know the phone numbers and anything like that, it gives her some type of directive and involvement.
That's interesting, and of course, a good thing to do. I'm sitting here thinking intellectually, of course. With my girlfriend, for instance, that's been about 15, 18 years ago. I was a fully grown adult, but I had never, ever handled end of life business for one. At that point, I'm grown. We were best friends since ninth grade. She lived in California, but everyone who was close to her in California knew she had this best friend back in Philadelphia, such that we had to deal with her job, for instance, and dealt with me on legal matters because they knew of me.
Mm-hmm.
Someone who doesn't have that relationship and have to deal with those kinds of things, end of life can be difficult, especially
Absolutely.
when you're dealing with legal matters.
Absolutely. And that's why it's important for us to have things in writing, and so that we can cause more chaos and death than is needed and necessary. And we live in a world today where information is so available. Like, you can Google how to put together a succession plan. You can Google how can I my funeral wishes. You can Google just about anything. But it's just we don't take the time to put those things in order because we have a mindset that we can do it tomorrow. That
We're
tomorrow
always
is
going to
always
have
going to show
time.
up. Tomorrow is always going to show up. But what if tomorrow doesn't? I'm every day we turn on the news and we hear of the different tragedies that are going on all around the world. And so, and another thing is people aren't financially ready. So people aren't taking out life insurance to cover funeral expenses. People are looking at life insurance as leaving an inheritance to their family and stuff like that. But basic things, just covering your funeral expenses. So we find that there's a more increase of GoFundMe pages. People are looking to raise the money just so that they can have a proper funeral and burial for their loved one. So we can get the process started now and have those conversations while we are in our sound mind and healthy enough to have those discussions. It would really alleviate a lot of the extra pain that
Yeah.
goes with it. Because
Yeah.
grief in and of itself needs its own attention. And it's one thing for me to suffer the loss of my loved one, but now I have to deal with all this other stuff and my own life. And
That's
so
something that's really happening now. We just look at what we are just coming out of in terms of 2020 and the pandemic. I mean,
absolutely.
in some cases, the preparation of even let's take it to you were prepared with life insurance, for instance, or even living wills you were prepared with. To some extent, you weren't even able to exercise those things because you couldn't have conversations, you couldn't have last words with the loved ones, you couldn't
Mhm.
see, feel, or touch the loved ones with the special circumstances we just lived through.
Absolutely. And that 2020 was a global pandemic. It was a global grief setting for everyone involved. My girlfriend, a girlfriend of mine, she used the term 2020 was raw. It stripped everyone down to the bone of rawness where you felt everything. And so when you look at people not being able to go to the hospital, to go into the hospital with their loved one to check them in, to personally speak with the doctor, and then they weren't able to visit. They had loved ones who were in the hospital for weeks and months at a time, and the only contact they had with them, if they were having contact, was through a video call. That the nurses and the doctors were trying to set up, but the nurses and doctors are treating hundreds of patients also. And then you get the word that your loved one has passed away. So now you have these other components associated with their loss. But then on top of that, many people were not able to have funerals. They weren't able to bury their loved ones. They weren't able to hold a repast. If they were able to have a funeral, it was graveside in many cases. For some people, it took months before they were even able to come together and have anything for their loved one. So you have all of these things that compounded grief in 2020, and we're still feeling the effects of it in 2021 because people lost several family members over that period of time. So they weren't even able to really grieve the first one before the second one, the third one, and so forth came. Not only that, but grieving the loss of change. Many people who were used to going to work now are home, they're isolated from other people. So that also is a loss. And then not being able to travel to attend a funeral of a close loved one, grandparents. I've heard of stories where some people weren't even able to go home to bury their parents. I had a client of mine who She lived here. She and her family lived here. She lost her father in India, and she wasn't able to go home to his funeral because they weren't letting anyone into the country from the United States. And she was very close to her father. So when we think about all of that, and we think about just the pressures of everyday life, that's where the chaos is built up like a pressure cooker. And so we find people who have shut down, people have become depressed. Suicide is high. People have gone missing. They're like, I'm out. I can't take it anymore. So they've actually gotten up and walked away from home. So you have marriages that have fallen apart. And the root of a lot of it was undealt with grief. People didn't have an outlet to actually grieve and to breathe in their grief.
Let's talk about
Yeah,
that other segment that maybe some of us don't really focus on, and that's children. Children, especially during this period, they may have also suffered in an unrecognizable way, even with their loved ones right in the household.
absolutely. Absolutely. Children are, we hear the stories, children are resilient. They'll bounce back. They get through everything. Children are just like us. They handle trauma and grief in just a different way because many times they don't know how to voice it. They don't know how to express it. So with children and grief, usually you have to pay attention to their behavior, because they may not say anything, but they will act out how they're feeling. So if you had a child who was once quiet, got along, and now they're aggressive, and they're everything is touchy to them, they're agitated all the time about something, you need to pay attention and ask questions to them. How are you feeling? What happened? How are you feeling? How did that make you feel? And see and listen. Something that we don't do a lot of times, we don't listen to our children. We hear them, but we brush them off. Oh, they're just kids. They're just teenagers. They'll bounce back. But now we're learning, and we've seen this pattern where teenagers have grown up to adults, and they are suffering the impact of something that happened in their childhood, undealt with trauma, undealt with grief, and they didn't have a voice. So we need to start talking to them, paying attention to them, looking at behaviors, asking the questions. And here's the thing, not being afraid or ashamed if you need to bring in a professional to speak with your child. And I there's a stigma that right now we don't want our children seeing anyone professional because we don't want them thinking that my household is bad. It's not about us. It's
Yeah.
about the health and the well-being of our children and the health and well-being of you as an adult. So not
Yes.
being ashamed to reach out to someone and say, hey, I really think my child needs to be spoken to, and I don't know how to get there, but maybe someone else can help me get there with them.
Yes, I had that personal situation with a granddaughter who lost her mother at age 5,
Mm,
and she had limited grief counseling, and she needed much more. She's graduated from college now. She's doing well on one end, but emotionally that was not something fully dealt with. And like you say, I mean, it can, you can carry that on for a while into adulthood, unresolved therapy, counseling.
mhm.
Will I imagine at this time, someone in your profession is inundated with cases to help people through this trauma.
Mhm. We are. I give my hats off to anyone who is trying to walk the journey of grief with other people. One of the things that we have to recognize, though, is we have to take care of ourselves as well. We sometimes we get lost in it because our hearts. A person who works with those who are grieving, their heart is to help heal, and help them find hope again. And so, a lot of times, what happens is we get lost in everybody else, and we forget about us. And so, we have to learn to step back, and we have to learn to address our own grief in the midst of it. But right now, we don't have enough people who are qualified and willing to help others just walk through the journey of grief. You're not necessarily counseling anyone, but what you're doing is providing a safe space for them so that they can talk about it, they can express it. You may hear stories 1,000 times, and you need to be okay with hearing that same exact story because that's where that person is in that moment for grief. And so, my colleagues and I, we are overwhelmed to some degree because again, grief usually it happened in pockets. So we talk about grief on the job. um, when you had someone who lost a family member on the job, you were able to have the support of your coworkers at that time. And so death wasn't happening to everybody at one time, right? So now you have death happening all around you with just about everyone you may know at the same time. What do you do with that? And so we need to really provide safe spaces for people to be able to go to, and they're able to express their grief without judgment, without telling them, you're still grieving. It's been 6 months. You're still grieving. It's been a year. It's been 3 years. It's 5 years and you're still grieving. They don't need that. What they need is someone to let them know that grief is normal and grief does not have a time limit on it. There, and it's okay to grieve. Now what I'm going to say this though, if you find someone who is in an extended period of grief and they are not moving forward in life, they have basically become isolated. They're not taking care of themselves. They are stuck in the past. And what I mean is stuck in the past is that's the only place that they live. They don't have any other conversations. We need to get them other support. And we need to have them talk to a therapist or a counselor or even a doctor and not be ashamed to let them know, you know what? You need help. You need more help than I can supply at this time, or provide for you at this time. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to be your support system while you seek that additional assistance.
I often share the story of, and this was years ago, of attending grief counseling with a friend who had lost two children. And, we were sitting around the table and people were speaking at will. If they felt like being quiet, they were quiet. If they felt like speaking, they spoke. And one woman talked about the loss of her son, and she lost her son in a swimming pool accident. And she was talking about the loss of her son, and then she started crying. Well, what I didn't know was that she had lost her son 16 years prior.
Mm.
Now, I don't know if she was just living in that space, as you mentioned, but just sitting there at that session, I was shocked that her grief felt so real and recent. It had been 16 years. But
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that I know has been spoken about and recognized perhaps during this whole pandemic situation, jobs are becoming more cognizant of their employees in terms of work, in terms of life outside of work life, because these Zoom calls have exposed, if you will, another side of these individuals. Sometimes children show up in the Zoom, but basically just expose the home life that maybe work life was oblivious to,
Mm-hmm.
and how important that is. And even in school, the teachers are now exposed to another side of the children's lives and how that impact the classroom. So I say that and I mention that because it definitely appears, um, I don't know, more training, awareness, resources needs to be put in places of work life, whether it's benefits or school life, training with teachers, more counselors, just because this really exposed a deficit in in areas that are crucial. That is your emotional well-being, support. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I hope that something comes out of that, but here in life, being real, oftentimes those kinds of things come so take so much time to come and be of benefit to the communities that really need it.
Absolutely. Um, the pandemic is had put everything into an in your face perspective. You had no choice but to face whatever you saw, whatever you were exposed to. It was in your face. The reality of home and work were joined together in such a way that no one could run from it. And so, even looking at, on your job, you were given 3 days to take off for the bereavement of a parent, I believe it was a grandparent, a sibling, right? Um, and then if it was a cousin, aunt, uncle, something like that, you were given 1 day. And if you were given that, some jobs didn't even give that. But the expectation was if that period of time, that's all you got. And we expect for you to come back and perform with due diligence,
Yes.
regardless of what you're feeling. We need you to get back to the numbers and and things like that. Children, I believe, were only given a day, maybe the same three, but it was a day, and they're expected to go back to school, and we'll give you some grace for maybe the first week or 2 weeks, but after that, you got to be back on your game, you know. But now I hope that an advocacy is developed where we fight for the health and well-being of people who are suffering grief and trauma. Now, I do know that on jobs, and everyone should look into this, your job should have an EAP, and that is an employee assistance program where you're able to go and request help from, whether it's grief or for your children. It could be for anything, right? They can also give you resources that you will need to help you through your journey. The other thing that you can do, if you find that you need more than that time that your job is giving you, short-term disability, you can also take FMLA if you need that time. Now, it does come, sometimes you're not going to get paid if you take that extra time off, but it will give you that time to heal. It will give you that space that you need to heal, right? So we have to look at what can work for me in it. We have to learn to speak up about what we need. We have to be our own voice about what we need. And we have to stand our ground because you're not going to fully function well if you are not well during grief.
I like to, I mean, this is just so much, so much very good information for all of us. And I once again so appreciate your being here because how many people realize the importance of the information you shared with us tonight, how they can go about it? Why don't I ask you that before we bring things to a close? Okay,
Sure.
so give me the top three things that you as an individual should make sure you're on top of, should pursue in light of end of life, taking care of business? I'm going to wrap that all together. Give me the
Sure.
top three things. You already said the best time to do it is now. Give me
Mhm.
the top three things someone should do in pursuit of taking care of business for end of life.
The very first thing should be recognize that death is going to be encountered by everyone. Death is a part of life, and there is no way around it. We're all going to leave here some kind of way one day. It is to prepare is to have the conversation first with yourself, understanding what is it that you want, right? Do you and things like do I want a church funeral or do I want it in a funeral home? Do I have the insurance to cover the expenses that I want? Funerals are pricey, right? And I have been to a funeral where it was $20,000 and up. I've also been to funerals where they've had just cremation or graveside burial. But are you able to financially cover those expenses? So that means getting your financial records in order. The other thing would be to have a trusted individual that you can have this conversation with, that you know is going to carry out those wishes. Because some of the things that we have to remember is not just me that I'm preparing for, but it's also for my family. So even down to who's taking care of the children, who is going to take my beloved pet, my precious children, who's going to see through what happens with my possessions, and things like that. So I definitely, one, have the conversation with yourself. Two, make sure that you are financially covered to do that. What if you don't have insurance? What will it take for you to at least cover cremation if you don't have enough for the burial a casket funeral? And then lastly, find that trusted person that you can speak with openly and honestly, that will carry through said things for you.
And I'd just like to repeat something you said about the children. You should begin to have a conversation with them when you know that they're old enough to um, understand. Is that appropriate? When they're old
Yes,
to understand what's going on. And the other thing with, especially in light of all of the death and loss around us, and even outside of that, we need to listen to our children.
absolutely.
We really need to listen to our children. I mean, even I said in light of what's happening, this whole 2020 experience, but even more beyond that, because
Hmm.
sometimes their depression, low feelings, sad feelings are often kept within. And we appear to be so busy that maybe we don't even make an attempt to engage. But I realize that's important, and I'd like our listeners to hear that as well.
Absolutely. And we sometimes we just have to make a time for it. So I would say and I'll give this example. Last Thanksgiving, before the pandemic hit, we had Thanksgiving dinner here at our home. And we invited both sides of our families. My husband's side and my side of the family came together for Thanksgiving. Um, and we had a conversation about planning for end of life. The conversation came about because in October of that year, I lost my youngest sister. My youngest sister was in her 40s and she had a heart attack, lived in Texas, right? She has five children, and uh, she didn't have everything in order. And so I remember my niece calling me and saying, we can't find mommy's policy. We can't find mommy's medical records that they needed for something else. We can't find this, we can't find that. Well, here was the thing. My sister had those things, but they all weren't in one location for them to find it, right? And so it was stressing my niece out. Now, here we are in Pennsylvania, she's in Texas, and she also had a cousin who was more like a sister to her, who was able to help guide them through different things. And then she also has a sister in Florida who flew into Texas. So before we even got there, they were able to pull everything together to make, you know, the arrangements and things like that. So things got taken care of, but it was stressful during that time that no one really had time to focus on their own emotional needs until the day of the funeral, literally, you know. And that at that point, everybody is, you know, we're all falling apart. Everybody is just their mindset is, I can't believe this happened, right? So my sister, my brother, and I, when we got back to our hotel room, we said we need to have a conversation with our family about this very thing. What are we going to do to help them prepare themselves? And so my sister and I began to research information. We began to pull up questions that would have just get them to thinking about their own preparation. And we challenged everyone that by the first of the year, of the new year, they need to at least have key things written down that if we were to walk into their home, something happened to them, we could walk into their home and know where to find those documents that were needed. At least put them, if you don't have it written out, put everything in one drawer, you know, but have where someone can find it. And so that's how we began that process of just having a conversation. It started around a holiday dinner. Now, some people may say, oh, that's so morbid. Why are we talking about death, you know, during Thanksgiving? We're supposed to be giving thanks. Well, here was the thing. It was an opportunity because everybody was together. You know, so we just took advantage of the opportunity. And just to let you know, it happened all after dinner. You know, we were able to enjoy one another. We weren't morbid going into the meal, but we
Yeah.
definitely were able to have that conversation.
And it's too bad that it's looked at that way, that it's morbid. How can you talk about it? And the example you give of the children having to run around, where's this, where's that? They can't even deal with the loss that's a shock because they got to deal with business immediately.
Exactly.
Um,
Exactly.
so much for sharing that. I hope and trust that it did people some good to hear it. If you need to get moving, you know, along that way, then let's do it. Get moving, take care of business. And like you say, if you do no more than say, put everything in one place, put it in one drawer, you know, if that helps you not have to delve so much into talking about it, do at least that.
Absolutely. And can I just add one thing?
Sure.
I just need to address our millennial or young people, those who are between, and I'm going to say those who are between ages of 15 up to about 35-ish. That conversation really needs to be had with them too, because the children, young children and early adults, they don't believe death is right around the corner for them. You know, it's, oh, that's not going to happen to me. We're finding that the conversation really needs to be had with that age group so that they have a voice in what they want also. And you know, and when you get into your 20s and your 30s, if you have a job, you're able to have life insurance. And not just the life insurance that your job provides, because when you leave that job, that insurance goes away also. So you need to have your own separate insurance that can help with expenses also. So I just believe that it is truly a community conversation that involves all ages that are responsible so that people know at least what is expected and what is needed, so that everyone can at least walk through the journey of grief just a little bit more at ease than, when there is chaos.
You mentioned that age group, and I'm sure many people know this. That particular age group have the lowest rates for insurance because insurance is by age. So the
Absolutely.
older you are, the less it costs. So that's a opportune time to have it. But nonetheless, Lisa, for our folks in the audience who want to know how they can get in touch with you, we'll put that information in the chat. But go ahead and let folks know, how they can reach out.
So they can reach out to me through Wanderers Haven dot org, or the .com. It's .com. I'm sorry, I keep messing up. So it's wanderershaven.com. And we're actually more than just a grief paraministry. We look at your finances, we look at trauma, we look at marriage, singleness, but it's all in preparation of making you whole, and walking through a journey of wholeness in the Lord. And so they can definitely go to wanderershaven.com. They can reach me by, and I will definitely put this in the chat. They can reach our website. Here we go, wanderershaven.com. There we go. So, and that's really the best way to get in contact, because there they can submit their information, and I'm able to schedule an appointment with them. I will reach back out to them and we can schedule appointments to have an initial consultation, and then we can move forward according to what their need is.
I thank you so much. And folks, you see why we're called Karren's Carrots. There's always some carrots we are bringing to you to share with you. This was a very important topic, a very, very important topic. And I'm so glad Lisa had the opportunity to come in this evening. And I'd like to thank you all, the regulars and those, if I didn't say hello to you, I often get caught up in my conversations and I don't say hi to the audience, but hi. We appreciate you being here. Thursdays at 7 p.m. is when we bring you Karren's Carrots. And for those of you who like to reach me, you can go to my website, easintheCsuite.com. I'd love to hear from you. Email me at info@KarrenEHenderson.com. And as you all know, that's Karren with 2 R's. And we also currently have a sale going on. Everything in the shop is 10% off. You can once again go to the website, easintheCsuite.com, click on shop and have yourself a ball. T-shirts, ebooks, even free ebooks. I'd love to see you. I'd love to have you visit. And I thank you again, Lisa, so much for being here. I really appreciate it. And last week we got knocked out by the thunder and the lightning, but thank God we were able to make a return.
Amen. I thank you so much, Karren. I thank you for the opportunity to come and to share, and please keep doing what you're doing in Karren's Carrots, because it is very beneficial. A lot of people aren't having these types of conversations on the job or off the job. So I really appreciate you.
I thank you so much, and I will do my best. How is that?
Awesome.
So long, all of you, to Karren's Carrots this week, and we look forward to seeing you next week.